And what's going on, Trojan family? The Madman here on the one and only USC LAFB channel and our one and only Salute to Troy podcast. You guys must be wondering, Madman, what are you doing here all by yourself? Where's Ryan? Where's the great Tim Prangley? Where's the crew? Where's the LAFB crew? Well, I wanted to just kind of jump on and give my thoughts. I didn't have an opportunity to be part of the weekend festivities, if you will, with Ryan and Tim. It was a very special weekend in my life. My daughter turned 1. It was her first birthday over the weekend, so was very busy with family obligations and all of that really good fun there. And obviously watched the game very closely, but had things to do with the family, so didn't get a chance to jump on live with the guys. And really excited about, obviously, our Wednesday call-in show with Tim and Ryan coming up here tomorrow. But wanted to just kind of jump on after a few days to give my thoughts on the game and the state of the team moving forward. So much conversation right now going on in the content creator community, in the traditional media community, in the Twitter sphere about what really went down against Illinois and how do we sort of make of it. And so wanted to just kind of get on and offer my thoughts here and really sort of try and provide an objective overview. I think there's still a lot of emotions very high on both sides of the fence. I think there's folks that are really sort of leaning into the positivity of, what a loss could mean in terms of character building, in terms of really sort of sharpening the knives for the rest of the season. And then there's folks on the other side of the equation really saying this is a catastrophic loss and has really significant ramifications on USC, not just this year, but beyond. And I want to try and be somewhere in the middle, be objective, be fair moving forward. And, my initial impressions of the game, if you guys recall on the pregame show with Ryan, I had predicted that this was going to be a very tough game. I had predicted SC to come out on top 33-27, really because I thought Illinois was going to give their best effort moving forward after that 63-10 smashing against Indiana. Brett Bielema, a very proud coach, someone who really got his chops and got his expertise as a coach really on offensive line play. So you knew the offensive line was going to come out and probably give their most inspired effort. And then that was also going to translate on the other side of the ball with the defensive line as well. So you felt like it was a wounded animal in Illinois. They were going to come out with their absolute best punch. The crowd was going to be raucous. And I was expecting Illinois' level to really go up and give the Trojans a game as a result of that. I think the reality of the situation is why we're concerned after this loss and why we're deeply concerned after this loss is this wasn't necessarily a story of Illinois' level going up and matching the Trojans, but really of USC's level going way down and needing Illinois to a place where not only was it at parity, but really Illinois outplayed USC for most of this game. And I think that's really where the concern lie. Last week I talked about this team and look, they could play their A game, I felt, against Oregon in Oregon or play their A game in Notre Dame and come out on the short end of the stick, just given the matchups, given the rosters, given the environment. But I said for all other games, it was going to take a B- level of play for USC to be able to lose any other game not named Oregon, not named Notre Dame, given the schedule and given what we saw the first 4 weeks. And that's essentially what we got. I think offensively, this was a B+ effort, really a valiant effort. I think Jaden Mayava competed so hard, played all 4 quarters so tough. He had his bumps along the way. He had some mistakes, but my goodness, he also had some amazing throws. And for him to be down 2 starting offensive linemen in Elijah Page and Killian O'Connor, you knew it wasn't going to be this clean sheet pocket that he had the first 4 weeks of the season where he could just sort of sit back, be super comfortable, pepper the ball wherever he needed to, and really be in an extremely low-stress environment. You knew without those 2 starting linemen that he was going to get stressed. And you saw that, particularly in the middle part of the game where the throwing windows, were tighter for Illinois in the secondary, but also the throwing pocket was sort of collapsing on him. There were moments where he couldn't step into the throw. There were moments where he had to roll out prematurely and kind of bail on the play. There were moments where he felt the pressure, had to throw the ball a little bit earlier, and it was sort of making an impact on his accuracy. But he also found a way to sort of battle through all of that and make some incredible throws. We'll talk about the great Makai Lemon here in a second, but some of those balls, he leveraged that seam route with the tight end, again, very, very effectively, both with Lake McCree as well as Walker Lyons. And then there were a couple of balls, even before that flurry in the fourth quarter, to Lemon in particular, where he dropped it over the primary corners and the linebackers and right before the safeties, and some touch balls there, 25 yards down the field, 30 yards down the field, where he anticipated where his receivers were going to be and just dropped it in the center of three defenders. Absolutely some sensational stuff. Having said that, the offense also struggled with turnovers. I mean, the opening drive turnover, Wayman Jordan fumble, Maiava had a pick himself, and then, of course, kind of the famed trick play there where you had that, illegal man downfield with Jean-Ray Reed, going a little bit too far in terms of where he needed to be for that trick play to execute successfully. So you take 7 off the board there, and you have 2 turnovers. Overall, it was a B-plus effort. And also, I think there was an opportunity at several instances of the game for the Trojans to really be able to seize momentum. There was an opportunity early, like we talked about on that opening drive, and you're potentially sort of leaving some points on the table, perhaps even 7 on that opening drive, and now you're down 7-0. But also at the end of the half, very controversial call there at the end of the half on that first Illinois fumble right at the USC goal line. I have to be honest, looking at the replay, that didn't look like a fumble to me. And I agreed with the call that whatever you called on the field, it had to stand because it was such a bang-bang play and so close. But in all honesty, that was a break for the Trojans. And the fact that SC couldn't capitalize there, at the start of the second half, we're able to kind of go down, kick the field goal. You could argue a little bit. They were really rolling. Could they have come away with 7? But, you're not going to complain with a field goal there. But to only be down 14-10 when it was really looking like it was either going to be 17-7 at least or 21-7, having that bolt and jolt of momentum, but not being able to capitalize on it in the second half with some drives stalling out really hurt the Trojans. And so overall, that was a B-plus effort. I think a valiant effort. Maiava did some amazing things. But again, the accuracy did go down in the middle of this game because of the offensive line struggles with 2 starters being down. But B-plus is a very valiant score in that regard, and certainly good enough to be able to win the game. It's really on the defensive side of the ball where obviously all the concerns are right now, and that was probably a D-plus defensive effort. When you saw Illinois roll up 502 yards, really essentially have 9 scoring drives, if we're being very honest, because, you're looking at, or 8 scoring drives, I should say, 4 touchdowns, 2 field goals, and then 2 other possessions that resulted in fumbles inside the USC 2-yard line. Effectively, you're talking about 8 scoring possessions just about that this defense gave up. And you couple that with a couple of alarming statistics where, Illinois only had 161 yards of total offense against Indiana the week before, only 2 yards rushing. And one play in that game against Indiana was a 59-yard coverage bust. So essentially, Illinois had 100 yards total offense against Indiana, and that team that had 100 yards total offense had 500 yards total offense against USC. I mean, a 400-yard difference over the course of the week. And I think what was so concerning is just how easily they were able to methodically move the ball down the field without having to do necessarily anything overly innovative or any one particular player breaking out and having a career game. Like if you recall in years past, 2023, 2024, particularly with those Grinch defenses, we always had that running joke on Salute to Troy that, look, this is going to be a career game for somebody. Some receiver breaks out for 10 catches, 212 yards, 4 touchdowns, or some running back pops off for, 35 carries for 220 yards, something like that. That wasn't really the case here. It was just a case of Illinois being able to methodically move the ball down the field, really at will, playing very much the same offense that they had played for most of the season. And I think that's what's so concerning. And when you couple that with the fact that this defensive front that we talked about, Jaden Mayava and this defensive front, were going to be the two greatest barometers of how this season was going to go. And these were the two levers. The degree of improvement that these two levers provided would really set the outcome for this USC season. And the excitement that we had over the athleticism, particularly on those edges, and the tenacity, and you couple that with what Jakeem Stewart was giving you on the interior and Floyd Boucard in terms of the young guys, and you thought this was really going to be a step forward. And for that front to not have any sacks in this game was a huge red flag. Obviously, SC had the one sack, but it was on, from a defensive back from DeCarlos Nicholson coming around that corner. The fact that this front could not generate a sack when Indiana had 7 sacks on Illinois, when Duke had 4 sacks on Illinois, that's what's got us very, very alarmed. And when you close your eyes and you sort of think about reflecting on this game, this defensive performance fell somewhere between 2022 and 2024. The methodical way a defense was being worn out in the second half felt a lot like last year. This game had the makings in many ways of that Minnesota game. It had the makings in many ways of even that Maryland game in terms of just how this defense was sort of wearing down in the second half, even that Washington game in the second half. And then you couple that also with the opportunism that the defense showed, particularly from Eric Gentry there in the fourth quarter on that incredible punch out with the fumble. And you said, hey, is this potentially now 2022 defense where they're going to give up a lot of yards in between the 20s, but they're going to be opportunistic at the right time to be able to propel this team to victory? And so it felt very much of a regression of going back to the world of 2022 meets the world of 2024. And it also, in many ways, felt so much like that Utah game in 2023. It was the identical score. It was 34-32 on a game-winning field goal when Utah came to the Coliseum to shock the Trojans, and very similar feel. Utah was able to control that game for 3.5 quarters. Trojans make a huge push there, courtesy of some great special teams play as well, and then ultimately fall short at the end there. And so, to me, I think that's what's got all of us concerned. Not that this team lost, because if we really take a step back, I had predicted this season to be 9-3. I thought going to lose to Oregon in Eugene, going to lose to Notre Dame in South Bend, and then there was going to be one other game that we were going to get clipped somewhere. And initially, at the start of the season, I thought that was going to be Illinois. Now, where the season sort of started playing out for Illinois, you saw some holes on the offensive line when they played Duke, and then you saw the shellacking that they had at Indiana. I sort of stepped off of that and I said, well, maybe Illinois isn't the game where this team could potentially get clipped. It may be somewhere else down the road, perhaps at Nebraska, perhaps Michigan, but that may be the game that they get clipped. But overall, this is going to be a 9-3 football team, 7-2 in the conference, and either just in or just out of the college football playoff. And I think walking away now from this game, it's all about how this team responds from here. And I think so much of the narrative about what the truth is in this game is going to be about how this team moves forward. And the reason I say that is because the indictment of Lincoln Riley the last couple of years has not necessarily just been because of the record. It has been because of how the record was achieved. And what I mean by that is the last 2 years, we've talked a lot about who's really ultimately to blame. So much of the conversation, even, these last couple of days, is this on Lynn? Is this on Lincoln? I mean, who is this really on? I have a philosophy where one game, when you clearly see a deficiency on one side of the ball, that's on your coordinator. That's on your scheme. That's on your strategy for that one particular game. But a losing streak is on the head coach, because a losing streak speaks to a lack of fundamental culture, a lack of toughness, a lack of togetherness to be able to overcome the adversities that any season and every season in football brings. And so the reason the last 2 years have been so disheartening from a Lincoln Riley perspective is think about the losing streaks. 2 years ago, this team starts off 6-0 with a soft schedule, goes 5 out of 6 losses, before ultimately, the Miller-Moss game in the Holiday Bowl. Last year, you have that first loss against Michigan, and then it's on the road of 5 of 7 losses. That's the issue the last 2 years, is that it was losing streaks. And so now the question becomes, what USC team is this? Is this truly a team that can overcome, a difficult road environment, not the best of losses, certainly, but they can overcome it and they can get to a place where they could be 9-3, perhaps even beyond that, and really show that they made an incremental jump from the last 2 years? Or is this a USC team where this first game now is again the beginning of a losing streak for a third consecutive season? Because if you follow this up now with a loss at Michigan, all of a sudden you're staring at a team that's quite possibly 8-4, perhaps even 7-5. And when you look at the schedule that USC has this year, look, the honest to God truth here is 75 to 100 coaches could get this roster with that schedule to 7-5. 7-5 is the absolute baseline of this particular season. When you talk about home games against Missouri State, home games against Georgia Southern, you talk about home for UCLA, home for Northwestern, home for Iowa, on the road against Purdue, and home for Michigan State. Those are 7 gimmies when you look at what those teams are in terms of roster and what USC is. And so this season is ultimately being defined where the floor is 7-5. The season starts at 7 wins. And so 100 coaches could get you 7 wins with this roster and this schedule. And so that's why this next game is so incredibly critical, because if this one loss spills to a second loss, now all of a sudden you're not talking about a team that is potentially making a step forward in year 4 of the Lincoln Riley era, but this is a team that has been the same team of the last couple of years, and an 8-4 team on a schedule where the floor was 7-5 is a failure. There's just no question about it. And so moving forward, the last thing I'll say is there was also a lot of talk about the 2-minute situation with Lincoln Riley here and what you should have done from a game management standpoint. And I understand all of the arguments. This is one where I'm going to give Lincoln a reprieve. And you guys may completely disagree with me on. And the reason I say this is you needed to score when you did. I thought Lincoln actually sort of managed the momentum there pretty well, and especially going for 2 earlier. He actually put some stress on Illinois, because think about it. If you don't go for 2, you have 2 shots to get the 2, right? But the idea is, in the analytics world, if you get the 2 first, if you're down 14 and you just go 7-7, the game is still very much on the racket of the team that's up 14 points, because all they have to do is either run out the clock in one of 2 possessions or just get a field goal. But even if when they have to get that field goal, it's a tie game. They're not in a place of stress whatsoever. The analytics behind going for 2 when you're down 31-17 is you got 2 shots to get the 2. So you're probably going to net out with 14 points anyway on 2 consecutive touchdown drives. But if you get the 2 on the first shot, now you're potentially putting some strain on the team that's ahead, because they're thinking ahead now. Now, if we don't score on this drive, or we don't run out the clock on this drive, the opposing team can now take the lead on us, and it's not a tie game in a tie situation. So I really like that Lincoln went for the 2 there and sort of leaned into momentum and putting some stress on Illinois. And then obviously it worked out beautifully with the Gentry punch out. But you got to recall, on that previous drive, this wasn't really a situation where SC was barely getting to second down, and they were just peppering the ball all over the place. And within 4 plays or 5 plays, 85 yards, boom, touchdown. You got to understand that previous drive, there was a 4th and 3. Maeva rolls out, in traffic, finds a crowd, gets the ball to his primary playmaker in Lemon for that first down. And then let's not forget, the first Lemon touchdown came on a 4th and 7. And that was a dime, kind of outside shoulder there. Beautifully done. Lemon had the step. So it wasn't like USC was just moving the ball at will and had the luxury to decide how they were going to score. Furthermore, I think Illinois was really staggered from a momentum standpoint, had no answers for Makai Lemon. How they sort of kept Lemon in man-to-man coverage is a mystery to me. That guy is challenging Jeremiah Smith for the best wide receiver in the country. There's absolutely no question about it. And given his statistics, Mekhi Lemon is every bit not only in the Biletnikoff race, but probably the front runner for the Biletnikoff right now. But given those situations, I think Lincoln Riley actually did the right thing by scoring when he could, because it just wasn't that easy. He was relying on a defense that didn't come through for him, and ultimately that's his responsibility. But I'll close with this, guys. Now this is on Lincoln. How does this team respond to Michigan with a bye week? A lot of talk about some guys banged up. Let's get them sort of healthy. You were down 2 offensive linemen. You don't know what the status of Paige O'Connor is going to be out for Michigan. You don't know what the situation with Paige is going to be. You don't know what the situation with Jacoby Lane is going to be. A lot of conversation the last 24 hours on kind of food poisoning. Kamari Ramsey had food poisoning. A couple other guys had food poisoning. I personally don't subscribe to that being an excuse for what happened against Illinois. You have enough depth. You have enough talent to be able to get that done. But they're going to get healthy. And now you have a bye week and an extra week to heal, to prepare, to be in a situation now against Michigan. This game against Michigan and these 10 days that lead up to the Michigan game, without hyperbole, are the most important 10 days of Lincoln Riley's tenure as a USC football coach. And that game against Michigan is the biggest game of Lincoln Riley's head coaching career at USC, because that game will tell us what we need to know. If they can overcome that game and get back on the winning track, there's still the narrative for this team to make strides and move forward this year. And if they lose that game, then this is very much the USC team of 2024 and 2023, which would be catastrophic for Lincoln Riley in year 4. So lots to unpack there. Please hit that like and subscribe button for all of us at USC LAFB. And please let us know how you're feeling. Feel free to agree with me. Feel free to disagree with me and all the things. Love to hear from you as always. Timbo Slice, a.k.a. Tim Prangley, and our great founder, Ryan Dyrud, and me, the 3 Troy Stooges, back together tomorrow for the Conquest Call-In Show. And we'll have all great coverage from a pregame perspective. Tim with his great photos, Ryan with all his coverage from the press box, over the next couple of weeks, as we always do for you. But just wanted to get on and give my thoughts since I missed out on the fun. As always, Trojan fam, be happy, be safe, and really excited for your engagement. And as always, fight on.